The rain fell heavily on the day Daniel was buried. As everyone slowly left the cemetery, Margaret stood alone beside the fresh grave, clutching the black umbrella her husband had carried for years. For 36 years of marriage, Daniel had been a loving husband. He never raised his voice, never missed an anniversary, and never forgot to bring her favorite flowers on Sundays. But there was one thing he never explained. The farm. An old farm nearly 2 hours from town. Every month, without fail, Daniel disappeared there for a day. Whenever Margaret asked about it, his answer was always the same. Please don't ask me about that place. At first, she respected his privacy. Then curiosity became frustration. Eventually, she simply accepted it. Yet 3 days before he died, while lying weak in a hospital bed, Daniel grabbed her hand. His eyes filled with tears. If something happens to me, don't go to the farm. Margaret frowned. Why? Daniel opened his mouth as if he wanted to explain. But before he could speak, a coughing fit overtook him. Hours later, he slipped into a coma. The explanation died with him. And now, standing beside his grave, Margaret couldn't stop hearing those words. Don't go to the farm. For weeks she tried to ignore it. But grief has a strange way of mixing with curiosity. The more she mourned him, the more she wondered what he had hidden all those years. Finally, one cold autumn morning, she got into her car. She was going to the farm. No matter what she found, the road became narrower as she drove. Eventually she reached an old wooden gate. The paint was peeling. The fence looked abandoned. Yet someone had clearly maintained the property. Fresh tire tracks crossed the dirt road. Margaret parked and walked toward the farmhouse. Her heart pounded. She half expected to discover another family. Perhaps another wife. Another life. After all, what else could require decades of secrecy? She pushed open the front door. The house was clean. Simple. Almost untouched by time. Then she noticed photographs covering an entire wall. Dozens of them. Children, teenagers, young adults. All smiling. All strangers. Margaret stared in confusion. Who were they? Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. She turned sharply. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally the woman asked softly, "Are you Margaret?" Margaret's stomach tightened. "How do you know my name?" The woman smiled sadly. "Because Daniel talked about you every week." Margaret felt her knees weaken. Every week. The woman introduced herself as Eleanor. Then she invited Margaret to sit down. What Margaret learned next shattered everything she thought she knew. 40 years earlier, before meeting Margaret, Daniel had been engaged to another woman. Her name was Sarah. They were deeply in love. Only weeks before their wedding, Sarah was killed in a car accident. But Sarah had been hiding a secret. She had been caring for 4 orphan siblings. After her death, the children had nowhere to go. Daniel couldn't abandon them. So he bought the small farm. He worked multiple jobs. Spent years helping raise the children, making sure they stayed together, making sure they had food, education, a future. Margaret listened carefully. But who are all the people in these photographs? Eleanor smiled. Those children grew up. She pointed at the pictures. These are their families. Margaret's eyes widened. There weren't dozens of faces. There were hundreds, generations, lives built because someone cared. But one question remained. If that's all he was doing, why hide it from me? Eleanor looked toward the window. Then her eyes filled with tears. Because Daniel made a promise. Years ago, one of the children had discovered who had been paying for everything. They tried to thank him publicly. Daniel refused. He believed kindness should never become a performance. He wanted no recognition, no praise, no attention, and eventually he worried that if people found out they would see him as some kind of hero. He hated that idea, so he kept everything private, even from the person he loved most. Margaret sat silently. The secret she had feared for decades wasn't betrayal. It was sacrifice. A sacrifice so complete that nobody knew about it, not even her. Then Eleanor handed her a small wooden box. Daniel left this for you. Margaret's hands trembled. Inside was a letter. She immediately recognized his handwriting. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then you ignored my final request. Honestly, I expected that. A tear rolled down her cheek. That sounded exactly like him. She continued reading. I never wanted you to think I didn't trust you. The truth is that I loved you too much. I knew if you discovered this place, you would spend your life helping these families alongside me. You already sacrificed enough for me. I wanted this burden to remain mine. But now I need you to know something. Everything good that happened here happened because you existed. Every hour I spent helping these children was possible because I had your love waiting at home. You were always part of this story. Margaret broke down crying. The room blurred through tears. For years she had wondered whether Daniel was hiding something terrible. Instead, he had been hiding something beautiful. Eleanor gently squeezed her hand. There's more. She pointed outside. Margaret followed her onto the porch. As they stepped outside, dozens of cars began arriving. Then dozens more: men, women, children, families. The property quickly filled with people. Margaret looked around in shock. What is happening? We told everyone you were coming. One by one they approached her. A doctor, a teacher, a firefighter, a nurse, a business owner, parents carrying babies, grandparents holding grandchildren. Each person shared the same story. Daniel had helped their family when nobody else would. He paid school fees, bought groceries, fixed roofs, funded college educations, covered medical bills, never asking for anything in return. Many of them owed their entire futures to him. And now they wanted Margaret to know, because she was part of his legacy too. As the sun began to set, a young girl stepped forward. She couldn't have been older than 10. She handed Margaret a folded piece of paper. Grandpa Daniel helped my mommy when she was little, she said. Margaret unfolded the note. It contained a simple drawing. Daniel standing beneath a giant tree, surrounded by smiling children. Above it were 5 handwritten words. Thank you for sharing him. Margaret pressed the drawing against her chest. For a moment she could almost feel Daniel beside her, smiling, quietly avoiding attention as always. Months later, Margaret made a decision. She sold several unused properties she owned. Using the money, she created a foundation in Daniel's name, not because he wanted recognition, but because she wanted his kindness to continue. The farm became a community center, a place where struggling families could find help, the same way Sarah's siblings once had. And every year hundreds gathered there, not to celebrate a hero, but to celebrate compassion, the kind that changes lives quietly, the kind that expects nothing back. One evening, nearly a year after Daniel's death, Margaret sat alone on the farmhouse porch. The wind moved gently through the fields. For the first time since losing him, she felt peace. She looked toward the sunset and whispered, I finally understand. The secret that had haunted her marriage wasn't another woman. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't a second life. It was a hidden legacy of love. And in that moment, Margaret realized something powerful. The greatest hearts often leave behind the quietest footprints. But those footprints can guide generations long after they're gone.